In 3 months, we did something that used to take 20 years. And if you ask me like where the world is going, like AI, the industry that's going to be influenced the most is those traditional chemistry and biology industries.
That's Kira Radinsky, and she's CEO of Diagnostic Robotics, which uses AI to make predictions that help patients get better healthcare.
I understood that I'm going to be a scientist who tries to make science go faster.
Kira loves using data and AI to make predictions, and she has an incredible track record starting more than a decade ago when she successfully predicted cholera outbreaks and riots. But she says predictions are only useful if you can do something to prevent bad outcomes. And that's why healthcare is such a great field.
What I envision specifically in healthcare is almost bots talking to bots, passing information.
On this episode of Crafted, we're discussing how AI will change healthcare, how to make better predictions, and how drug discovery is being reinvented, something Kira is also working on as the co-founder of Mana.bio.
So I'm not trying to automate everything. Like when you say automate drug discovery, I'm not going to discover everything.
Right.
I just want to accelerate it, which comes back to my childhood dream. I just didn't want to do it myself. I just want AI to replace me as a scientist. That's it.
Welcome to Crafted, a show about great products and the people who make them. I'm Dan Blumberg. I'm a product and growth leader, and on Crafted, I'm here to bring you stories of founders, makers, and innovators that reveal how they build game-changing products and how you can too. Crafted is brought to you in partnership with Docker, which helps developers build, share, run, and verify applications anywhere without environment confirmation or management. More than 20 million developers worldwide use Docker's suite of development tools, services, and automations to accelerate the delivery of secure applications. Learn more at docker.com. And Crafted is produced by Modern Product Minds, where my team and I can help you take a new product from 0 to 1 and beyond. We specialize in early-stage product discovery, growth, and experimentation. Learn more and sign up for the Crafted newsletter at modernproductminds.com. You became well known about a decade ago for your work predicting the future, for example, predicting that there would be a cholera outbreak in Cuba where there had not been one in more than 100 years. How did you develop your love for making predictions? How have you gotten so good at it? And why is healthcare such an ideal space for using AI to make predictions?
Well, my story goes way back. So I will start from my parents. As you can hear very quickly from my accent, I wasn't born in the States. I was born in Kyiv, Ukraine. And I was born in a time where Ukraine was part of USSR. And in general, being part of USSR means that you have very little freedom in almost everything. We come from a Jewish family. And if you're Jewish, it means there are certain universities you cannot get accepted to. There's certain limitations on the type of works that you can do. And after the nuclear reactor has exploded, and of course, the government didn't tell the people about that. They had to hear it from the radio from Norway. My mom was, I think, in the last train that was allowed to leave Kyiv because they were afraid from radiation and they didn't want people to run away. And around 89 and 90s, USSR started falling apart. And there was a lot of pressure coming in from the United States to at least let the Jewish community leave. And the USSR went out with an announcement saying that if you're Jewish, you are allowed to leave. And the main message was you were never citizens to begin with. So you're not immigrating, you're repatriating. In other words, coming back from wherever you came from. And my family was one of those families that was allowed to leave. Everybody knew there's going to war that's going to start in Israel. Remember the Gulf War in 1990?
Yeah.
And my mom was trying to predict almost a year in advance when to come to Israel so we wouldn't come during a war. Well, my mom was very precise. She almost predicted the time of the war. But unfortunately for us, we came 2 weeks before instead of 2 weeks after. So I always say that predicting the right timing has been always a big pain point in our family. And since I can remember myself, since I was, I think, 5, my dream was to be a scientist. That's all I wanted. I wanted to progress the knowledge of humanity just a little bit forward. I thought for many years I'm going to be doing it in healthcare. And when I was 14, I found a program in the Technion. It's one of the largest universities in Israel, where they're allowing students to join PhDs in their research. And I joined research mostly in cancer, prostate cancer, not because I selected the topic, it's just what they were studying. And part of my work was feeding those cells every day. And they had one request: when you feed them, don't touch with the pipette, don't touch the cells, you can get infection in. Unfortunately, like a week in or like 2 weeks in, I touched it and it got infection. and they sent us to one of the hospitals to get them new cells. But since that point, they would never allow me to do any biological experiments, nothing. Don't touch anything. And what they let me do is instead the analysis. You have to count how many cells you have. I'm talking about counting till 50,000. And I said, I'm not doing that. That's going to be the worst summer of my life. And I think at that point I understood that I'm going to be a scientist, but I'm going to be the scientist who tries to make science go faster as opposed to the person who actually does the work itself. And I was really excited about everything that's going on. And I thought about like, hey, wouldn't that be cool to take all of those data that you have and try to predict future events? And I started building a system that tries to take 150 years of news articles, using natural language processing to read it, identify patterns, and predict future events. And that's the work I was doing in Microsoft.
Wow. When you started building this prediction engine, what were you looking to accomplish?
Well, I wanted to do my PhD in natural language processing. And while I was playing with this, I was thinking, hey, it was almost like a joke. At the beginning, we were thinking about building semantic analysis, looking at whether an AI system can know if two words are similar or not. But then it's like, hey, well, why do boring things? Why not predict the future?
Yeah.
It's almost like a joke. And then, I built like a very simple statistical system to do it. And I was like, it's working. So one of the things I was trying to predict, there was like thousands of birds in Beebe, Arkansas, who just like fell out of the sky, all dead. No signs of disease, nothing. And I looked at our system and it found a correlation, a very interesting one, that it's not the first time that this is happening. It happened before in Norway and in Texas. And always the same time, 6 months before, people are looking for oil spills. And it was just statistically significant. Now, what I was thinking to myself is, well, if you have an oil spill now, I do understand if birds will die, okay, or animals or fish. But why does it take 6 months? And why, when they found them, they found no signs of disease, no sign of oil? So I thought that we had something that is pretty cool, right? Like big scientific discovery. And when I asked my friend, she was a biologist. She told me, well, this is obvious. I was like, oh, tell me more. And she says, okay, oil spills get the oxygen in the water to a much lower level, oxygen depletion. And then when you have less oxygen, those animals literally suffocate to death. And you wouldn't find any sign of disease. You wouldn't find them to actually starve. It's almost a hidden cause. So this is where it got me thinking, well, what did she have in her head that my system did not have? And what I realized is, unfortunately, most of you are not searching on Google oxygen depletion, unfortunately. So I couldn't have enough signal about that. And she had a lot of causal knowledge. In other words, she read it and she understood there's a causality between oil spill and oxygen depletion. And then I started thinking about, well, how would I take everything humanity knows about causality and mine it in order to create this causality graph, everything that we know about causality. Yeah. So I started with a very simple system, trying to see if somebody said on the news or then social media, and then eventually developed to like Twitters and queries and everything, A causes B. And then it became something happens after. And with time, we started building machine learning classifiers to actually predict causality or not. And we built, at that time, it's considered big, a graph of 300 million nodes and billions of edges representing causality that was already verified by treatment control group experiments historically based on common knowledge. And we started fitting that into correlation machine learning algorithms. So for example, how did we predict the cholera outbreak? The causality graph, we already knew that if you have floods, that might cause cholera. Why? Cholera is a waterborne disease, so the causality here is clear. But we all know that not all floods are going to cause cholera. There's floods all the time. And then the system was started to look for correlations, trying to identify places where it does cause as opposed to ones that are not. And it identified the following pattern. If you have a low percentage of water as compared to land, the probability of this one is very big. And an additional one is that you need to have the word drought in the news 2 years before. This is very weird, right? You have drought, 2 years later you have a flood, and then after this flood, there's a high probability of cholera. And this is what helped us predict numerous cholera outbreaks, including one in Cuba. It was the first one in 130 years. That was a very big thing. What I love about this example, and if we talk about causality, I think this is my main insight, is there's something you can do about it. Let's say I predict it. Cholera is very simple to treat if you get clean water in time. if you get clean water in time, you reduce mortality rates from 50% to less than 1. So all you need to do is get clean water.
So how does that inform your work today at Diagnostic Robotics? How did that move you back into healthcare?
So for many years, I've been deploying those systems, mostly in predicting economic events at the beginning. I started a company, I sold it to eBay. In eBay, we're doing this mostly predicting commercial events or commerce events, I would say, on the eBay platform. And then I wanted to go back to my roots. I wanted to do something in healthcare, like something in biology or chemistry. I was just never good at that. And I thought about kind of what's the biggest problem we see today in healthcare? Then I started listening to problems in physicians. And I think the biggest problem everybody was worried about is that till 2030, we're going to have 4 billion people on Earth without access to primary care. What does it mean? It means that if today we're waiting 3 hours on average inside emergency departments, it's going to become 8 and more, like it is today, for example, in China. And what's the best way of solving it? One way is just to automate. It's like we're going to automate as much as possible from the primary care physician work, but how much can you automate? Today you have, like one primary care physician per 2,000 patients. In certain areas, it's one per 5,000. It just doesn't scale. And I think most people would understand that it's about proactive care. Is if we can get less people sick, which is a lot of the work of the primary care physician, then we can actually control the system. And I was lucky enough to get introduced to Elevance, and through a partnership, they gave us access to more than 60 billion claims. We received additional access to almost 100 million medical records through different other partners. And we started building AI algorithms attempting to predict which patients will deteriorate in the next 6 to 12 months. So that was a very cool experiment, right? And we're really good in predicting it. And now we're coming back to the biggest question. So what?
Right.
Yeah, they're going to deteriorate. So this started me through a journey. First of all, how do you even define what's preventable? Luckily enough for me, somebody else answered that question. In 2007, there was a very nice paper published by Beth Israel. They had 60 physicians manually look at codes in inpatient visits and manually categorize them into preventable or not preventable. Next question is, okay, what do you want me to do about this? Tell me the secret.
Right.
So this got me to the field of causal inference. Causal inference was a very hot field of study. Approximately 10 years ago, somebody even got the Turing Award based on this. This is Judah Pearl's work. And what they were trying to do is take specialists and ask them to model in a graph the knowledge they have in their head in a causal manner. And based on this information, try to do a lot of simulations. If you talk to clinicians, the way they talk about this, they say, we don't believe anything that did not happen in a controlled trial. But I cannot do infinite amount of controlled trials. But if I had to summarize this very high level, the way we do it is for each patient, we'll find their twin, somebody who looks exactly like them, like same age, same social determinants of health, lives in the same area, same diseases. And they just have different physicians. One physician did A, another physician did B. And then we historically can see what happened. And if you do it with enough data, that's a very good way of mimicking the controlled trial. And then we started seeing, based on our historical data, what's the best clinical next step to do in order to proactively prevent deterioration of patients. I'll give you an example. Some of the examples are very simple. If the patient stops taking medication, that's not good, right? You need to help them with that. The question is, usually patients stop taking more than one medication. You have 15 minutes with your physician. Which one do I fight for? Okay, they don't take 10 of their medications. Well, what do I do? So the system even ranks the medication. And I'll give you a very nice example. It turns out that we had a patient that had hypertension, diabetes, CKD, a lot of diseases. And he stopped taking his depression medication. And very strangely, the system ranked the depression medications higher than all of the other hypertensive drugs, which is very counterintuitive to clinicians. Clinicians are still thinking about it very clinically and are not looking at the mental behavior of the patient. And the explanation the algorithm even gave was, well, if he's depressed, he will stop taking all of his other medications as well. So if you have to spend your 15 minutes, spend your 15 minutes here as opposed to others.
As you built these systems, what were some of the big unlocks to make the system work better, to make it more predictive?
I think one of our main discoveries here, just as an example, we noticed that patients who have some hypertension problems, they're taking PPIs. Think about this almost a drug for upset stomach. You see their blood pressure drops. And if you compare to the control group, there's no explanation. It's literally because of those PPI. Again, it's not a full control trial, it's mimicked, but still you see a very big difference. So we showed this to the physician, and he's like, so I don't believe in that. Like, until you explain me why, I'm not going to look at that. I was like, I don't know, I see a correlation. It's very statistically significant. So what that physician did, spent almost 2 weeks looking at papers till she managed to convince herself that she's correct. So the explanation was, she says, okay, patients who are taking these drugs, they probably sleep better. If they sleep better, there's other studies to show that blood pressure drops.
Right.
But she wouldn't even go into a controlled trial until she felt comfortable that the literature supports this. And a lot of the explainability of machine learning models today is like explaining it from the data that you have. Very rarely we're trying to explain it from data, like from the literature or like external data. So what we then did, we built a system that reads this medical literature. Every time we identify correlation, it tries to explain it. So one of the main discoveries we made, we were studying hypertension because it's a very important disease. Even like 40% of the population of the age of 50 is being treated with some hypertension drugs.
Yeah.
And we identified that patients who are taking beta blockers is a family of medications, as compared to other drugs for hypertension like ACE inhibitors and others, 15 years later, have an increased risk for Parkinson's, an increased risk by almost 40%. Now, there's like, oh my God, this is super interesting. But once you give them all of this explanation, physicians are like, oh, interesting. And if you could get the biological explanation, that's even more amazing, right? So my biggest breakthrough was, first of all, explaining only from your data is not enough. You have to explain from external data, especially when you work with healthcare people. They want like to really understand the science. A lot of them are scientists themselves. And then connecting it to an action using the causal inference.
What sort of predictions have you found, major air quotes here, easy to make? And what are the types of predictions that you're finding more difficult?
Very hard to beat in predictions what was yesterday. What was yesterday is going to be today. That's the hardest prediction. And you see this in patients as well. Patients who are sick will continue being sick. So very easy to predict it. You get to 99% accuracy. It's the same thing with earthquakes, right? It's like, well, no is
probably
the
not
one
today.
that gets the highest, the highest accuracy, right? So first of all, the industry has already understood this and developed metrics like precision and recall, like how many of all the earthquakes you're taking. So algorithms will not come to a point where they just say no, an earthquake every day. They're actually being penalized from missing an earthquake. I wouldn't say that this is as well implemented still in the healthcare world. It's still easier to say, here's an expensive patient, they're going to continue being expensive, as opposed to taking risk. The problem that it creates is a lot of bias. So there was a very nice paper, if I'm not mistaken, in Science in 2019. Somebody took the algorithm from Optum. So Optum is part of United Healthcare. They were providing analytics, and they were helping doing risk scoring of patients. And healthcare systems and clinics would call based on this list from top to bottom to those patients. And they noticed that patients that have the same diseases, if the patient is Afro-American, they will be ranked lower than a Caucasian patient. That's weird, right? They have the same diseases. Mm-hmm. So it turned out that the algorithm was taking into account the cost of the patient. What it eventually led to is that historically, Afro-American community was getting less treatment from the healthcare community. Therefore, they were less expensive, and it perpetuated that. So for the very first thing in healthcare, don't look at cost. I know it's trivial. I know that if you only optimize for who's expensive, just say, yes, the expensive ones will continue being expensive. If you're actually trying to do actionable things, then you have to take out the cost from the algorithm. The accuracy will drop, but the actionability will become higher. And I think this is a transformation that all of this industry is going. By the way, when you look at actionability and you look at bias metrics, most of the bias metrics disappear, which is, by the way, a good sign.
You're also the co-founder of Mana.bio, where the mission is to disrupt the drug delivery space using combined forces of machine learning and nanotechnology. I'd love if you could unpack a little bit of what that means and what led you to co-found Mana.bio.
So from an academic perspective, let's go back to the example of the drug repurposing. So using EMR data to do drug repurposing is taking existing drugs and saying, hey, maybe it's going to be useful for something else, right? Very, very, very common thought. And one of my PhD students said, well, you know what? I want to create a new one. How about that? Like, how about I use generative AI to try to predict the actual combination, like almost the recipe for the molecule? And what we did, I tell them, like, take all of the patents developed in the 30s, pretend it's the 30s right now, and generate like 1,000 molecules that you think are going to be really good ones for drugs. And then we'll manually check. Maybe one of them passed the FDA. We'll name the paper the drug that could have been discovered if you had AI, something like that. Out of the 1,000 that he discovered, 35 went through the FDA cycle beginning to end. In other words, all the knowledge that you needed to discover them was already in the 30s. It just took 20 years to find this needle in the haystack. What then we thought about, okay, cool. Maybe you can start creating like an automated system to generate molecules. I then met a fellow professor from the chemistry department. He was specializing in LNPs, which is a very big word for fats. And he told me about the drug targeting problem. Let's all remember the mRNA. mRNA, we all heard about it, I think, for the first time, maybe, during the COVID time, during the COVID vaccines. What does mRNA do? It's a message that if you send it to a cell, the cell will produce some protein. Some people have genetic problems. Sometimes it's not genetic, that some cell in the body is not producing certain protein, and then the person cannot drink, stand, breathe, a lot of problems. So it has the potential to treat a lot of diseases. The problem is, how do you get the message to the right cell? Who discovered how to get to the brain? Viruses. They had, 100 million years. They tried it all, did evolution, and then one of them found a way. So there's a company who took viruses, took out the inside of the virus, whatever they have inside, put the mRNA, the message that you want to send, put them in the body, and then it would get to the brain, to the liver, to whatever you would send it to. What was the problem? Well, the body doesn't love viruses. It kind of kills itself. And the question that this chemistry professor was asking me, can you use your machine learning magic, I quote, to help me copy from viruses and do the same thing with fats, because body loves fat. For me, it's almost like producing recipes. Like, how can I produce a recipe to build a space shuttle that will take my astronaut, in this case the mRNA, to the specific planet, the cell I need. And we started as an academic experiment. It's like, yeah, sounds like a very cool idea. Let's try it out. And it worked in mice, specifically for toxicity in liver. And then we started a company. We got an investment both from NFX and Andreessen Horowitz. And we started doing it more systematically. We started building image processing tools that read papers, because sometimes most of the data is in an image. You see like an image of a mouse. Right. It's like, you see this point is red. It's like, I need to know how red it is, right? In order to actually give it to an algorithm. So we spent a lot of time into building a pipeline that can actually produce this data through trained machine learning models. And at the end case, we're doing transfer learning, copying from viruses, and then producing generative algorithms to produce recipes. And then we got very positive results in the lungs, in the liver, in the spleen, initial results in the brain. We even got to monkey experiments with positive results. And we're excited to see kind of the next experiments evolving, because for me, this is the kind of revolution that, if you look at the delivery mechanism of what was used in the COVID vaccine, it took 20 years to develop this space shuttle. 20 years. We were lucky that somebody developed it.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm talking now about cycles of 3 months. In 3 months, we did something that used to take 20 years. And if you ask me, like, where the world is going, like AI, you see all of those generative AI companies raising a lot of money, and I'm super glad to see it. But I think the industry that is going to be influenced the most is all of those traditional chemistry and biology industries. All of the experiments are still done super manually. There's a lot of automation, robotic automation that's coming in. Very few generative AIs and AI in general to automate some of this process. The way we entered this process, so I'm not trying to automate everything. Like when you say automate drug discovery, I'm not going to discover everything. Right. I just want to accelerate it, which comes back to my childhood dream. I just didn't want to do it myself. I just want AI to replace me as a scientist. That's it.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about, you're working with, data and not with your hands. And I'm interested in this moment in AI, generative AI, and what it means. Big data are reaching biology and chemistry in ways that were previously not practical.
So I think for me, it started even with healthcare, more digital healthcare. I'm not a big believer yet that AI will fully replace, like human beings in certain positions. There's a very nice paper that was studying which professions disappeared from the world. And the only one that they claim who disappeared since 1800 is the profession of the person who was standing in the elevator and moving the elevator manually. Mm-hmm. And by the way, I met a person who's doing that. So it's not going to automate 100%. There's going to be some legacy. But it's going to automate a lot of the work that's currently being done. So in healthcare, it's a lot of the administrative work. I'm not talking about the clinical work. I think for clinical work, if physicians focus on the clinical work, I say clinical work is 10 to 20% of the time, right? Most of the time is documenting, making sure that you have insurance, calling the pharmacy to make sure that they have the right drug coming in. And for me, all of those generative AI specifically for call centers, which is a lot of the work of medical assistants today, they call patients up, they call the insurance. And because they don't have the infrastructure, this is very old industries. This is an industry that still works in fax.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I don't know if somebody listening here ever had to take their X-ray or CT. You get a CD. I was like, what am I going to put the CD on my computer? I don't have a place for it. But that's how they work. So here, for many years, they were trying to solve it in the United States and still couldn't. So maybe what I see, specifically generative AI and those voice agents, is trying to automate this connectivity layer. And what I envision specifically in healthcare is almost bots talking to bots, passing information, which in much smaller countries, and I look at Singapore, I look at Israel, many countries in Europe as well, they solved it by just infrastructure, just building a single infrastructure of passing information, single EMR systems. Here is just, for many reasons, very complicated. And maybe the way is to kind of frog jump all of this.
Yeah.
Okay. And just use those AI bots to do it. I don't think we're still ready for a system who's going to diagnose us, treat us, love us, be compassionate enough. I'm not saying the AI cannot do it. I'm just not sure there's openness in the market yet for this type of systems. Yes, triaging. Yes, intaking. Yes, transcribing my call and then putting it in text. No to telling my patient what to do. Liability problems too big. It's almost like the autonomous car. It's a very long-term play as opposed to what we see today. Now, let's move to chemistry, right? In chemistry, the situation right now is most of the work is done manually. It's like manually put in fats, manually like almost produce cakes all the time. And if you don't have good hands, you're not a good chemist. And I think those industries will go through a huge change once you have AI to at least tell what I do. I tell them the recipes. There's different AI companies who are actually producing the recipes. Mm-hmm. So they can automate a lot of the process and get to discoveries in a much faster way. Now, I think there's also a role where the chemistry people will actually help us leapfrog in the AI industry. I'll explain. Right now, we can buy a lot of GPUs. If NVIDIA can produce them faster, that would be nicer. Mm-hmm. But I think most of the cost is around electricity. Now, my question is, specifically in chemistry, they're doing a lot of work in developing better solar panels. They're producing materials. They're producing better materials for the chip. How can we help them accelerate so they can accelerate the production of lithography, chips, solar panels? And this is where I'm super optimistic and excited because they're doing it to help the AI industry where you have a lot of money coming in, and it might finally help green energy. It might even help the healthcare industry because more people are going to be healthy.
Yeah. Well, that's actually very counterintuitive because of all the concerns about the electricity usage, and you're saying actually it's almost good that it's causing a problem because it's drawing attention to solar panels are not as efficient as they could be.
Yeah, finally money will flow there because there is a real need because the companies who raise billions of dollars, they can continue investing it in electricity. They will at some point have to solve it, and then I believe it will sparkle more innovation in that space. Yeah.
I want to get back to Mana.bio for a second. There's a simple diagram on the Mana.bio website that presents the growth loop at Mana.bio as design by AI is step 1, build by robots, step 2, test by robots, step 3, learn by AI, step 4, and it goes back to the beginning. I'd love if you could walk us through a little bit of how that's working and how it differs from traditional drug discovery.
Okay, so traditional drug discovery is just, we're going to have a robotic system, just combine everything possible till it works.
Okay.
Pretty much, right? And more traditional one is just like, I'm going to manually try whatever I think is right. Like, I'm a scientist. I know how the body works. I'm going to guess it. It's that traditional.
Right.
Instead here, we're saying we're going to have a bot, not a robot, but like a bot reading medical literature, reading it. It's like, historically this worked, this didn't work. I'm going to send it to the lab. We have a chemistry lab. The chemistry lab is going to produce more data. I'm going to tell it which data I need to improve my knowledge. That's called active learning. That comes back. The algorithm learns itself. It's like, now I can tell you the recipes. You send it back to the lab. It's like, here's the recipes for you to check for this week.
Yeah.
They check it, do experiments on mice. Now, when I say they check it, some of this is done manually, some of this is done by a robotic system, but the injection to a mouse is still done by human. But with time, it also will improve. The results come back. It's like, we found one. That one moves to a clinical trial, like to a monkey or like more experiments. And the ones who are not, they keep on feeding back to the system. It's like, it didn't work. What did I learn from this? Learns again. Okay. And this infinite loop keeps on coming back. Some of this stuff is automated in the lab, like the loop is immediate. Some of this is still done by chemists who are like actually moving pipettes from one place to another.
Are there any particular tips that you have in terms of either how you've built these systems at Mana.bio or at Diagnostic Robotics for other builders out there who are not necessarily working in healthcare, but they're working with machine learning and generative AI models? I'm curious if there are one or two pro tips you might want to share to accelerate others.
The first one is I talk about causal inference. I think this is a topic that we don't study enough, and I want to see more scientists go into that space. Specifically, deep learning has gone into causal inference, how to find similar patients, how to mimic those control groups. Very big field of study. People should look at that. If you ask specifically about Mana.bio, one of the biggest problems is the active learning piece. The lab cannot produce whatever I want. Okay, they keep on telling us like, this is a very nice molecule. Ask me to produce it. Will take me, 50 years because I don't know how to combine it. So most of the algorithms are optimized for one goal. In my case, reduce toxicity, increase activity of the message I'm sending, but none of them takes into account the cost. It can be time, it can be money. And each experiment costs money. So what we started doing is also taking into account how much it's going to cost us from a time and money perspective. So you need to look at ROI, not just optimize for the accuracy. That's one thing that I see a lot of people not putting inside their models. The next thing is historically on data that you have and from papers, most report only positive results. Although we always say that academic research should be very opportunistic and they should, study whatever they see almost randomly, then don't. They pretty much copy from one another and they only study a very small part of the space. Mm-hmm. Therefore, our algorithms will copy them and also learn only that small piece of the space. Instead, I want to help them study different parts of the space. So what we do, we have exploration-exploitation mechanisms. In other words, at the beginning, we let the algorithm kind of make up whatever they want. Yep. And we even incentivize it to learn from very far places in space. Then we see if there's any gold in those areas, right? Did it see anything? Did it improve anything? And then we're actually producing stuff for the lab to produce us, not for, we say like, this is going to pass a clinical trial. It's literally a cycle for improving the machine learning algorithm. And you need to remember that in those cycles, people really want, you want the result in the first cycle, right? I want the molecule. I want the one that works. Yeah. It just doesn't work this way. It takes a couple of cycles, but you also have to spend time and money on training your algorithm, either by giving it more data, producing it, the data that it needs, and allowing in the paradigm of exploration, more exploration at certain points, at least in the beginning. Yeah. And it's very hard when you have a limited amount of money.
So you said a second ago, you incentivize the algorithm to explore more. How do you do that?
You play with the loss function. Usually they have some formula they're trying to optimize. And it says, I'm giving you a digital reward for this, digital reward for that. It's like, think about the incentive design. There's an entire field of study called incentive designs, mostly for humans, understanding economy, etc. And we're not getting enough from that field into our field to learn how to incentivize AI algorithms to do what's the right thing. It's really hard to define it in just a simple math formula.
Oh, interesting. I'm curious where you think generative AI is going to be really transformative in the years to come and where it's ill-suited or may continue to be sort of promise, but without delivering the goods.
Interesting. I think we need like almost an intermediate language representing text via code and then teaching those algorithms how to run them. So I see a lot of fields of study of trying to transfer text to code, but they're being done in a co-pilot. I'm an engineer. I need something to help me code. Nice. I'm talking about a higher level of inference by teaching them to code in their head in order to simulate situations. Mm-hmm. So that's one way that I'm a big believer. The other thing that has been also proven, there's the concept of chain of thought. The algorithms, most of those transformer models will learn this and mimic this. So you actually have to break it down to much smaller steps during the prompt. Now, the next generation of that is how can you teach it not only kind of breaking math equations into small pieces, into smaller problems, how can you teach it to use external tools? We need to think about how to train it to use tools in a smart way. Because unlike producing text, which is just learning from this set of words, what's the next word,
right.
Here you need to mimic what people did and how they actually solve problems, which is not always as structurally available on the web. It is produced by code, so maybe by code, or you can just inject it with tools. I'm thinking about like creating those marketplaces and additional people who are, as part of their marketplace, teaching those algorithms how to use their tools in order to generate it.
Wow. Sure, this is fascinating. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Of course.
That's Kira Radinsky. I'm Dan Blumberg, and this is Crafted. Crafted is brought to you in partnership with Docker, which helps developers build, share, run, and verify applications anywhere without environment confirmation or management. More than 20 million developers worldwide use Docker's suite of development tools, services, and automations to accelerate the delivery of secure applications. Learn more at docker.com. Special thanks to Artium, where I launched Crafted to see how Artium could help you build your future at artium.ai. And Crafted is produced by Modern Product Minds, where my team and I can help you take a new product from 0 to 1 and beyond. We specialize in early-stage product discovery, growth, and experimentation. Learn more and sign up for the Crafted newsletter at modernproductminds.com. Please share Crafted with a friend, and if at first you don't succeed, try and try again.
It's like, aha, it didn't work. What did I learn from this? Learns again.